You know that moment when you realize your entire life has been a carefully constructed lie? For me, it wasn't some dramatic revelation or a private investigator's photos landing on my desk. No, it started with a handkerchief. A simple, white handkerchief with pink initials I'd given my wife Sophie for her birthday. Funny how something so innocent could unravel 15 years of marriage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The truth is, Sophie and I had been drifting apart long before that damned Christmas party. I used to watch her get ready for work every morning, spending extra time on her makeup, choosing her outfits with meticulous care. "It's just professional," she'd say. But there was something in the way she'd smile at her reflection, a secret playing at the corners of her mouth. I'd tell myself I was being paranoid, that 15 years of marriage had earned her the benefit of the doubt. I remember the day I first met Sophie. God, she was radiant, this brilliant young accountant who could light up a room just by walking into it. I was the quiet photographer who somehow managed to catch her eye. We were so different, yet it worked. She was the flame, and I was content to orbit around her light. For years, that was enough. They say photographers see the world differently. We notice the small details others miss. A subtle glance, a lingering touch, the way someone's body language changes when they think no one's watching. Maybe that's why I started noticing things about Sophie that others might have missed. The late nights at the office became more frequent. Her phone would go silent whenever I entered the room. Small changes in her behavior that were easier to ignore than confront. I tried talking to her about it once. "You're imagining things, Alex," she said, laughing it off like I was being ridiculous. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of, what? Guilt? Fear? Or maybe just irritation at a husband who couldn't trust his wife. Looking back now, I realized that's exactly what she wanted me to feel. Like I was the problem. Like my suspicions were just manifestations of my own insecurities. People often ask me how I didn't see it coming. The truth is I did. I saw every sign, every red flag. I just chose to look away. It's amazing what we can convince ourselves of when the truth is too painful to face. But sometimes, the universe has a way of forcing you to open your eyes. And for me, that moment came at the annual company Christmas party, where my hobby of photography would finally reveal the truth I'd been trying so hard to deny. I should have known something was off that evening when Sophie spent an extra hour getting ready, wearing that black dress I'd never seen before. "I want to look good for you," she said. Another lie in a marriage that was built on them. If I'd known then what that night would reveal, would I have still gone? The answer is yes, because sometimes you need to watch your world burn to finally see it for what it really is. The Sterling and Henderson Financial Group always went overboard with their Christmas parties. That year was no exception. The grand ballroom at the Riverside Hotel was transformed into some designer's vision of a winter wonderland. Crystal icicles hanging from chandeliers, white frosted trees dotting the corners, and enough mistletoe to start a small farm. I remember thinking how the whole setup felt artificial, much like my marriage had become. Sophie's department had spared no expense. Open bar, live band, gourmet buffet, all the trappings of corporate excess. I positioned myself at our table, camera in hand, playing my usual role of the quiet observer. Through my lens, I watched my wife transform into someone I barely recognized. 3 glasses of champagne was all it took for Sophie to become the beating heart of the dance floor. The Sophie I married was still in there somewhere, in the way she'd throw her head back when she laughed and the natural grace of her movements. But there was something different now, something calculated in the way she worked the room. Every dance seemed choreographed, every laugh perfectly pitched to carry across the music. And then there was Tom Henderson. Tom Henderson, the recently divorced CFO who'd promoted Sophie twice in the past year. I watched through my viewfinder as he claimed his 3rd dance with my wife. He was tall, distinguished looking in that generic corporate way, salt and pepper hair, tailored suit, practiced smile. The kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted. And that night, what he wanted was to dance with my wife under every piece of mistletoe in the room. I kept count. 3 times under the mistletoe, 3 kisses that lasted a fraction too long to be casual. 3 moments where Sophie's hand lingered on his chest after they pulled apart. Through my camera lens, I captured each moment, each subtle touch, each secretive glance. The photographer in me couldn't help but appreciate the composition, the way the soft lighting caught the flush in Sophie's cheeks, the possessive way Tom's hand rested on the small of her back. Between dances, Sophie would return to our table, breathless and glowing. "Isn't this wonderful?" she'd ask, but her eyes were already scanning the room, looking for him. I'd grunt in response, adjusting my camera settings, pretending to be absorbed in the technical details of photography rather than the psychological drama unfolding before me. That's when I ran out of film. A simple thing, really. Just a mechanical click signaling the end of the roll. I had 2 more in my coat pocket, hanging in the cloakroom. It's funny how the smallest decisions can change everything. A trip to get more film, a conversation overheard, a truth finally impossible to ignore. Looking back now, I wonder if Sophie knew what she was doing when she let Tom lead her away from the dance floor for the 4th time. Did she think I was too preoccupied with my photography to notice? Or maybe she just stopped caring whether I noticed or not. Perhaps that's what hurts the most. Not the betrayal itself, but the casual way it was done, as if I wasn't even worth the effort of discretion. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. First, let me tell you about what I heard in that cloakroom, about how the truth sometimes comes wrapped in whispers and knowing looks, about how the camera never lies, even when we wish it would. The cloakroom was one of those dimly lit affairs that hotels try to make elegant with mahogany coat racks and brass fixtures. As I rummaged through my coat pockets for the spare film rolls, 2 women's voices drifted from the other side of the rack. You know how some conversations just freeze you in place? This was one of them. "Can you believe her? And right in front of her husband, too." The first voice dripped with scandal. "He must be blind, always hiding behind that camera of his." The second voice replied with a laugh that felt like ice down my spine. "Well, everyone knows about her and Tom's lunch meetings. I swear, that conference room has seen more action than their bedrooms." I stood there, film rolls forgotten in my hand, as their words painted pictures I couldn't unsee. They left, their heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving me alone with a truth I'd been desperately trying to ignore. When I returned to our table, Sophie was there, flushed from dancing. "Where'd you disappear to, darling?" she asked, all innocence and champagne smiles. I lied about buying more film, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. I was about to ask her about Tom's office rumors when someone whisked her away for another dance. Time has a way of moving strangely when your world is unraveling. I lost track of Sophie for what felt like minutes, but could have been an hour. That's when I saw her emerge from the corridor leading to the conference rooms, her fingers working quickly at her blouse buttons. Even from a distance, I could see the slight dishevelment in her usually perfect hair. Sometimes your feet move before your brain catches up. I found myself standing outside that conference room, hand on the doorknob, heart thundering in my ears. Inside, Tom Henderson stood with his back to me, the sound of his zipper cutting through the silence like a knife. "I'm looking for Sophie," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady. "Must be mistaken," he replied, not turning around. "She hasn't been here." The lie hung in the air between us, as obvious as his still undone zipper when he finally turned to face me. I left, but something pulled me back 5 minutes later, after Tom had returned to the party. The conference room told its own story. Pushed apart chairs like the long mahogany table with its telling stains, and there, in the trash bin, a flash of white and pink that stopped my heart. The handkerchief. One of 6 I'd given Sophie for her birthday, her initials CM embroidered in pale pink. I picked it up, and the evidence of their encounter was undeniable. The scent, the dampness, the truth of what had happened here, all of it crashed over me in waves. I stood there, photographer's eye taking in every detail. The distance between the chairs, the marks on the table's polished surface, the way the room's lighting cast shadows that seemed to mock me. Each detail was a pixel in a larger picture I couldn't ignore anymore. When I returned to the party, I watched Sophie dance with Todd from accounting, her body moving with the same grace as always. But now I saw everything differently. The way she avoided my eyes, the slight tension in her shoulders, the careful distance she maintained. 15 years of marriage, and I was finally seeing my wife clearly for the first time. The next 20 minutes stretched like years. Sophie chatted, laughed, played the perfect wife while I sat there, the handkerchief burning a hole in my pocket, its presence a constant reminder of what I'd discovered. As we put on our coats to leave, I caught Tom's eye across the room. He gave me that practiced corporate smile, and I wondered if he smiled like that every time he zipped up his pants in that conference room. The drive home was ahead of us, and with it, all the questions I needed to ask. But right then, watching Sophie check her lipstick in her compact mirror, I realized something. Sometimes the most devastating discoveries aren't the ones that surprise us, but the ones that confirm what we've known all along. The night air was crisp as we left the hotel, Sophie's heels clicking against the pavement, the sound echoing my heartbeat. The car's interior felt suffocating, thick with unspoken accusations. I waited until we cleared the parking lot, the darkness of the highway stretching before us like a confession waiting to happen. "You're hiding something from me, sweetheart." The words came out calmer than I felt, my hands steady on the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" Her voice had that careful tone, the one she used when preparing her quarterly reports for Tom. Tom. His name in my mind was like striking a match. "You know me, Sophie. I'm like an old gossip when it comes to rumors." I kept my voice light, telling her about the conversation I'd overheard in the cloakroom. Through the corner of my eye, I watched her turn away, her face hidden in the darkness of the passing streetlights. "I haven't heard anything like that," she said, her voice small against the car's engine hum. I changed tactics, my next words calculated. "You looked sexy tonight on the dance floor." I'm sure I wasn't the only one who thought so. My hand reached for her thigh, a gesture that would have been natural just hours ago. "Why don't you come closer? Let me show you how much I want you." "Not tonight, Alex. I'm tired." The words came too quickly, too rehearsed. "That's not fair, Sophie." I felt the bitterness creeping into my voice. "I've been trying to make love to you all day, but you kept putting me off until tonight. And now suddenly, you're too tired?" "I'll make it up to you tomorrow," she offered, still staring out the window. "Are you sure there isn't another reason you don't want to make love tonight?" The silence that followed was deafening. "What's that supposed to mean?" Her voice had an edge now. "Think about it, sweetheart. Just think." "No, Alex. I want to know what you're implying. Right now." The dam broke. "Fine. You want it now? You've got it." My voice was ice. "I think you don't want to make love tonight because you're terrified to let me near you. You don't want me to find out that I won't be the first one to touch you tonight." Her gasp cut through the darkness. "What the hell are you accusing me of?" "I'm accusing you of cheating on me, Sophie. With Tom. Tonight, at the party." Each word was a bullet. "I'm accusing you of being the woman those ladies were talking about in the cloakroom." Then I laid it all out, everything I'd seen, everything I'd found. The conference room, the handkerchief, the stains, her buttoning her blouse, Tom's zipper, the lies about her whereabouts. With each detail, I felt her shrinking into her seat, her denials becoming weaker. "That's ridiculous, Alex. I don't understand how you can believe I'd do something like that." But her voice trembled. She had explanations for everything. The promotion discussion in private, the spilled drink she'd cleaned with the handkerchief, the imagined buttoning of her blouse. Each explanation more desperate than the last. When we got home, she didn't even try to argue anymore. She just grabbed a pillow from our bed and headed for the guest room. The soft click of that door closing felt more final than any slam could have. I lay in our bed, my bed now, I supposed, staring at the ceiling, surrounded by the lingering scent of her perfume on her pillow. 15 years of marriage, and all I could think about was how many other nights she'd come home to me after being with him. How many times I'd held her, kissed her, loved her, not knowing where she'd been or who she'd been with. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was the realization that I'd have to decide what to do next. Because despite everything, despite the evidence and the lies and the pain, I still loved her. And that, more than anything else, made me hate myself almost as much as I hated her in that moment. The days after that night became a bizarre dance of avoidance in our own home. Sophie and I moved around each other like ghosts, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. I spent those days in a fog, mechanically going through the motions of life while my mind kept replaying every moment of our marriage, searching for signs I might have missed. The divorce attorney's office was exactly what you'd expect. Leather chairs trying too hard to look expensive, diplomas covering the walls like armor. He was refreshingly blunt, which I appreciated after weeks of lies and half-truths. No evidence meant a he said, she said scenario. My higher income meant alimony. Everything split 50-50. Even with proof of infidelity, the infidelity of it wouldn't change much. Maybe no alimony, but the rest would stay the same. His advice? Either work on saving the marriage or hire a private investigator to gather evidence. Then come back. I sat in our living room that evening, nursing a beer, letting his words sink in. That's when Sophie came home from work. She stood in the doorway, watching me for what felt like hours, but was probably just minutes. She looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "Rob," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we can't keep going on like this." She sat down, hands fidgeting in her lap. "I know what you think, and you're wrong, but I have no way to prove it to you." I took another sip of beer, saying nothing. "I could bring in people from work to tell you that I don't spend my lunch breaks in Tom's office," she continued, her words rushing out now, "but you wouldn't believe them because they're my friends. I could bring Tom himself to tell you there's nothing between us, but you wouldn't believe him either." The mention of his name made my fingers tighten around the bottle. "I love you, Alex," she said, and for the first time since that night, she looked directly into my eyes. "I don't want our marriage to fall apart. I need you to meet me halfway." "What the hell does that mean?" My voice was hoarse from days of minimal use. "I'm quitting my job, today." The words hung in the air between us. "I can't work for Tom while you're thinking what you're thinking. My marriage means more to me than this job." She moved closer. Her perfume, the same one she'd worn at the party, making my head spin. "I need you to leave those thoughts behind, and I need you to forgive me. In your mind, even if I haven't done anything to deserve forgiveness. Just tell yourself, all right, she messed up, but she loves me and I forgive her." Her eyes were pleading, filled with tears. "I really do love you, Alex. I mean it. And I don't want our marriage to fall apart. Love is a funny thing. It can make you forgive things you never thought you could forgive. Or maybe it just gives you an excuse to be a coward. Either way, I chose to stay, to try, to pretend. We moved forward, or at least we told ourselves we did. Sophie got a new job at a smaller firm across town. We went to dinner parties, hosted barbecues, played the happy couple. But things were never the same. Trust, once broken, is like a shattered mirror. You can glue it back together, but the cracks are always visible, distorting everything you see. For 2 years, we lived in this carefully constructed reality, both of us knowing it was built on shifting sand. Then came the invitation to her class reunion, and with it, the final act of our marriage. But that's another story, one that proves sometimes the truth refuses to stay buried, no matter how deep you try to bury it. The 5-hour drive felt like an eternity. Sophie chatted about old classmates, while I nodded at appropriate intervals, my mind wandering to all the parties we'd attended since that Christmas night. How many fake smiles had I worn? How many times had I pretended not to notice her eyes following other men across a room? The moment we stepped into that hotel ballroom, everything changed. There, across the room, stood Victoria Parker. She was wearing a black cocktail dress that hugged every curve, her dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders. Time had been kind to her. She looked even more stunning than she had in our senior year. A crowd of former football players surrounded her, their varsity glory days long behind them, but their desperate attention still focused on the girl who'd been every boy's dream. I felt my chest tighten. Victoria had been my first love, my first real heartbreak. We'd shared that clumsy, beautiful first time at the drive-in theater, watching a movie neither of us could remember. 2 months later, she left me for some college guy. When she tried to come back, I told her to go to hell. The slap she gave me had stung for days. Now, 20 years later, just the sight of her made my hands shake as I adjusted my camera strap. Old habits die hard. I fell into my usual role, camera in hand, capturing moments people would rather forget. Sophie did what she always did, drink, dance, flirt. But this time was different. Bill Moser, her high school sweetheart, kept appearing at our table. Each dance between them grew more intimate, each laugh more private, each touch more lingering. I'd seen this dance before, at another party, with another man. When I saw them slip out through a side door, my stomach turned. I'd lived this moment before. The same sick feeling, the same urge to follow, the same need to know. I waited a few minutes, then followed their path. The hallway was empty, but a familiar sound caught my ear. Sophie's giggle, floating from the cloakroom. My fingers found my camera instinctively. This time there would be no denials, no explanations, no second chances. The flash illuminated the scene like a spotlight. Sophie on her knees, her dress bunched around her waist, Bill's pants around his ankles. Click, their shocked faces. Click, the moment they realized their world was about to implode. Click. What the hell? Bill's voice cracked. I kept shooting, my fingers steady on the shutter. Sophie was screaming, trying to cover herself, but I didn't stop. Every click of the camera felt like revenge for every lie she'd told, every promise she'd broken. Wait, Rob. Victoria's voice behind me was soft but firm. She stood in the doorway, her high heels in her hand. Can I get copies of those photos? That's when everything clicked into place. Bill's your husband? She nodded, her face a mask of calm fury, unfortunately. What are you gonna do now? She asked. Walk away from that pathetic deceiver, I replied, surprised by how easy the words came. Want to grab a cup of coffee? Victoria was already putting her heels back on. I could use someone to talk to. Denny's, corner of 6th and Wilmot, 30 minutes. I needed time to grab my bags and check out before Sophie could catch up with her excuses. At the hotel desk, they handed me a message from Sophie. Please don't do anything rash. Wait for me. I told them she'd be staying until checkout time, paid the bill, and walked away. The irony wasn't lost on me. 20 years ago, I'd watched Victoria walk away in this same hotel. Now I was the one leaving. Victoria was already at Denny's when I arrived, sitting in a booth, looking smaller somehow without her heels. We ordered coffee, and she said what I never expected to hear. I never forgot you. I never forgave myself for what I did. Strange how life works. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you never knew you were missing. Sometimes the end is just another beginning in disguise. And sometimes, when you think your world is falling apart, you're actually watching it fall into place. Denny's fluorescent lights have a way of making everything look harsh and real. Victoria sat across from me, stirring her coffee absently, the diamonds on her wedding ring catching the light with each rotation. 20 years ago, I'd imagined putting a ring like that on her finger. Funny how life works out. You know what I remember most about that night at the drive-in? She said, finally breaking the silence. Not the movie, not what we did, but the way you looked at me afterward, like I was the only girl in the world. She paused, her spoon clinking against the cup. Bill never looked at me that way, not once in 15 years of marriage. I found myself studying her face, searching for traces of the girl who'd broken my heart. They were there, in the slight curl of her lip when she smiled, in the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. But there was something else too, something that only time and pain can create. When I came back to you that summer, she continued, and you told me to go to hell, I deserved it. But God, it hurt. I spent years wondering what might have happened if I hadn't been so stupid, if I hadn't left you for that college guy who turned out to be nothing but empty promises and varsity jacket memories. The waitress topped off our cups, the fresh coffee steam rising between us like ghosts of possibilities past. Outside, the sun was starting to rise, painting the parking lot in shades of pink and gold. We'd been talking for hours, piecing together the puzzle of our past, while our spouses were probably still at the hotel, trying to explain away their indiscretions. You know what's ironic? I said, watching the sunrise through the streaked windows. All these years, I've been the one behind the camera, capturing everyone else's moments. Tonight, I finally created my own. Victoria reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Her touch was warm, familiar, yet new. What are you going to do now, Alex? I thought about Sophie, about the life we'd built on shifting sand and broken promises, about the Christmas party that had started the cracks, and tonight, which had finally shattered everything beyond repair. I don't know, I answered honestly. Start over, I guess. Find out who I am without a cheating wife and a camera to hide behind. We could start over together, Victoria said softly, then quickly added, not right away, of course. We both need time to deal with our divorces, to heal. But maybe the universe is giving us a second chance. I looked at her then, really looked at her. Not through a lens or through the filter of memory, but as she was now, a woman who'd lived and lost and learned just like me. Maybe, I said, but first, we need to learn how to trust again, both of us. The morning light was streaming through the windows now, the diner starting to fill with early breakfast customers. Regular people starting their regular days, unaware that in this booth, two broken people were contemplating the possibility of becoming whole again. You still have my number? Victoria asked, standing up and smoothing her dress. Yeah, I replied, and this time I'll actually use it. She leaned down and kissed my cheek, her perfume bringing back a flood of memories. Don't wait 20 years this time, she whispered. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. But this time, it didn't feel like an ending. As I sat there, watching the sunrise paint the world in new colors, I realized something. Sometimes the best photographs aren't the ones you take with a camera, but the ones life takes of you, the moments that capture you in the act of becoming someone new. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in years, I was actually looking forward to finding out. Sometimes you have to let go of the picture you thought life would be, to find the story it was always meant to tell.